don't stop the mic. We've stopped the time for you. If you would like to get back on, please do.
All right, sorry. Yeah, someone private messaged me to kick me off. Okay, yeah. Anyway, the evidence for Jesus of Nazareth. It seems to me that the evidence for the life of Jesus has been overstated here a bit. I am not one who. Okay, I was talking about the moral aspects. I'll get back to that in a second. It seems to me that the evidence for Jesus has been overstated a bit. I am not one who argues that Jesus never existed. I am not one who argues that there never was a Jesus. I take sort of the middle road and say that there probably was a historical Jesus, but he probably was very little, had very little in common with the figure that we read about in the New Testament. Jesus is the product of legend and myth, in my estimation. I know that a lot of Christian apologists argue that can't be possible because they date the gospel stories to so soon a period after Jesus's life that it would have been impossible for these sorts of legends about his resurrection and his post-resurrection appearances to have been created. But this has been proven to be false, and it's actually based on a misreading of a book, and it seems to me that so much of Christian apologetics rests right on this argument that it just isn't possible that the stories that we read about Jesus in the Gospels were the product of exaggeration or invention or myth making, and I just see no reason to believe that. You talk about the evidence of the empty tomb. You say there's archaeological evidence because there's no archaeological evidence to contradict the Bible. I would argue that geochronology contradicts the Bible, at least a literal version of the Bible, quite definitively. And the evidence, there is no definitive scientific evidence for a worldwide flood, as in the flood of Noah. That also would contradict the Bible. Just two examples off the top of my head. But as far as there is no archaeological evidence, no positive evidence for the life of Jesus at all. Now, again, I don't argue that Jesus never lived, but you can't argue that there is positive archaeological evidence for Jesus. And there certainly is no reason to believe that there was an empty tomb, that no empty tomb has ever been discovered. And even if there were the discovery of Jesus's empty tomb today, 2,000 years later, it would prove absolutely nothing. So the arguments that we should just read the Bible and read the New Testament uncritically, to me, just don't make a whole lot of sense. I don't see that is a warranted assumption for us to make. I think there is some history in the New Testament. I think there is some legitimate history to be gleaned from it, but we have to read it critically. We can't just read it and say, oh, well, it's obviously all true because of this and this and this and this. We have to read it critically. Let me go back to the moral argument very quickly because because that was where I was when I was cut off the mic. Someone asked, why is rape wrong? Well, again, if there are objective moral standards, which I said don't need a God to exist, and in fact can't exist if they're defined by God. If there's an objective moral standard, then rape is wrong because rape is wrong. If, as I believe, morality is defined by us, then rape is wrong because we say it's wrong. And to me, that is enough. And not only is that enough, that's good. That means that we have decided, we have asked ourselves a moral question, and we have answered it for ourselves. Not just my morality, but our morality as a whole, as a species, with very, very few exceptions. We have decided ourselves that this is wrong. And to me, this carries much more weight and has much more meaning than to simply say that rape is wrong because God says it's wrong. That to me is not a moral code. That is following orders. And if you can decide for yourself that rape is wrong, or that murder is wrong, or that stealing from someone is wrong, and you can think of a real reason why this act, whatever it is wrong, then you don't need to appeal to God. You have created a moral standard much more powerful than anything that could be handed down to you from a divine authority. Let me see what else. You mentioned transitional fossils. Where are the transitional fossils? All fossils are transitional fossils. This is a misunderstanding of how evolution works. If a fossil, the only way a fossil would not be a transitional fossil is if it is an evolutionary dead end. If a species leaves an ancestor species that lived in a later epoch than that species, then it is a transitional fossil. If there is a descendant species from humanity at some point in the distant future, if humanity is not the last line in our evolutionary history, then we someday will be transitional fossils. Every fossil is potentially a transitional fossil. Finally, let me just, how much time do I have left? 3 minutes? Okay, 2 minutes. Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Let me just say, as Christopher Hitchens said, we don't have bodies, we are bodies. And I like to say, we don't just live in the universe, we are of the universe. We are part of this place, and we are part of it in a way that we would not be if we were simply created and magically planted here by a God. And that in and of itself is just a preference of mine. That is not necessarily evidence that that is true, just as Shock's preference that there be absolute moral standards is not evidence that absolute moral standards exist. Just that Shock's preference that the universe be the product of his particular theistic God. He would clearly prefer that, but that does not mean that that is in fact the case. Atheism to me is true because it is the most likely scenario. Occam's razor advises us to reject any explanation that requires too many assumptions. And to me, the main reason why I'm an atheist, the main reason why atheism makes the most sense to me is because God, given what we see in the universe, given what we know, or at least what we think we know at this point about the universe, gods are an unnecessary assumption. Everything works without that assumption. And I think I'll just go ahead and wrap up there. Thank you, Shock, and I look forward to hearing your next presentation.
Talking, so I had to go out and come back in. So hold the clock a second. All right. Okay, you ready? Now, what is it? I got 10 minutes? Right? 10 minutes? Not you, Penguin. Yeah, remember, Mega, when you got on, when Steve got instant message, I was on the mic and you bumped me off. But that's okay, man. Okay, ready? Go. We haven't heard any arguments for why we should believe atheism is true. Steve now concedes that the Christian God can exist. Listen, on objective morality, he believes it just comes from evolution and stuff like that. But here's the problem. Think about this, guys. All the abstract objects, like greed, hatred, cruelty, selfishness, think about this. What obligates me to align my life with one set of those abstractions rather than with a different set of abstractions on atheism? Why am I morally obligated to align my lifestyle with loyalty, compassion, fairness, and so forth, rather than greed, selfishness, cruelty, and so forth? It seems to me on atheism, there isn't any basis